China's government faces anger on the streets as frustration over COVID lockdowns spills over. Protests have been taking place in several cities, with some calling on President Xi to step down.
The pandemic policy is prolonging our suffering. This policy is neither sustainable nor scientific. This policy won't change unless we speak up.
We'll be exploring the challenge to China's leaders after nearly 3 years of a zero-COVID strategy. Also on the programme, with more rail strikes on the way, a warning from the government that there will be no pay rises unless reforms are accepted. The Italian island where homes, cars and lives have been swept away by a devastating landslide.
When the torrent of debris and earth came hurtling down here, little could withstand it.
To Murcia.
Good evening. Thousands of people have been on the streets of China's biggest city, Shanghai, today, protesting at strict COVID restrictions and directing their anger at President Xi Jinping. To do that publicly is a very rare thing in China, but anger has been escalating since rules aimed at stamping out the virus were blamed for people not being able to get out of a burning building. That happened at Urumqi in northwestern China. There were then protests there, and also in cities from Chengdu and Wuhan to Nanjing, Shanghai, and in the capital, Beijing. And our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports now from there.
It's not unusual to see acts of defiance in China, but this was something different. A crowd of protesters in Shanghai chanted, calling for the country's leader Xi Jinping to stand down and for the Communist Party to give up power. A fire which killed 10 residents in Xinjiang last week has prompted widespread anger in China. Zero COVID restrictions have been blamed for hampering people's escape and slowing the access for fire crews. Whether this is true or not, it sparked waves of protest in the regional capital, Urumqi. This has now spread to other cities and university campuses as spontaneous memorial services for those who died in the fire have transformed into demonstrations, calling for an end to lockdowns.
It's all too chaotic. The implementation is so messy. It's been 3 years already.
The pandemic policy is prolonging our suffering. This policy is neither sustainable nor scientific. This policy won't change unless we speak up.
People are also blaming Xi Jinping personally for not changing the zero COVID approach, which is forcing business after business to shut down.
The policy is tied to something that really hits people in their everyday lives. The question of whether or not they can get on with going to work. That's where these restrictions have really come up against the idea that it's the leadership that is forcing these policies.
Protests have been building in China all year, with people here increasingly sick of zero COVID restrictions. The government seems to have drastically underestimated popular discontent, yet for the moment has no easy way out of the zero COVID corner it's painted itself into. Officially, China's goal is to return each outbreak to zero new infections using strict stay-at-home orders, travel restrictions and mass testing. But it's been criticised for not prioritising vaccination amongst high-risk groups and not increasing hospital capacity. There's also still no stated plan to open up. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
And you'll find more coverage on our website, including from Stephen about the significance of this show of public dissent in China. That's at bbc.co.uk/news or via the BBC News app. Here, the Transport Secretary has been talking about the ongoing rail dispute with a series of further strikes scheduled for December and January. Mark Harper said there had to be reforms to the rail system to free up money for a pay offer for workers. Here's our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
There have been repeated walkouts on the railways for months. Just yesterday, it was the drivers out on a day-long strike. Guards and signallers are among the staff who will hold another series of walkouts, this time for 48 hours each time, in December and January. This morning, the Transport Secretary Mark Harper said he wanted to see the dispute resolved, but he insisted a deal on pay must be funded by reaching agreement on changes to working practices.
Train operating companies and Network Rail will have the ability to reach a deal, but we have to be able to have that reform package negotiated, because it's only that throws up the savings. I do not have a bottomless pit of taxpayers' money to throw at this problem.
The RMT Union's General Secretary Mick Lynch met with Mr Harper earlier this week in what's being seen as a more conciliatory approach from the government, in tone at least. But unions still want assurances that ministers aren't pulling the strings.
They don't know whether the companies have been empowered to actually genuinely, in good faith, negotiate a deal. So what we're hoping for from Mark Harper is a letter to the unions setting that out and being clear not just about facilitating the deal, but what the government's role in settling it is.
Labour has said it wants to see people paid fairly, but it has not said it would commit to inflation-matching pay increases if it was in government.
You're asking me to commit to a specific number without having been invited into the negotiations and seeing the books. What I can tell you is that we think it's unconscionable that nurses and rail workers who went out and kept this country moving during a pandemic are not being paid enough to put food on the table.
Next month we'll also see nurses go on strike in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as a winter of more industrial action looms. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Energy suppliers are being warned not to increase direct debit payments for customers who are cutting their usage. The Business Secretary Grant Shapps has written to firms asking them to make sure that bills reflect actual use and not overestimated. Households have been reporting seeing their bills soar despite using less energy. The regulator Ofgem has been asked to look at making billing more responsive. The Metropolitan Police have said that the fatal stabbings of two 16-year-old boys in southeast London are linked. Kern Solanki and Charlie Barlotto were killed in Thamesmead and Abbey Wood just after 2 p.m. yesterday evening. Police have launched a murder investigation but have yet to make any arrests. A state of emergency has been declared on the Italian island of Ischia after torrential rain triggered a landslide that destroyed homes and hurled cars into the sea. At least 7 people have been killed. Our correspondent Mark Lowen travelled to the island, which is just off the coast of Naples, and he sent this report.
Rescuing the fragments of once tranquil Ischia, divers picked out what they could after the mudslide that cascaded through this island, tossing what lay in its path into the ocean or into each other. Some cars battered beyond recognition as torrents of mud poured down here. They scoured the seas for wreckage and bodies. With the number of deaths growing and reports of islanders still missing, the fear is that as more areas are reached, other victims will be found. It began before dawn on Saturday after torrential rain, the deepest and most sudden on record here, unleashing the chaos that tore down the hills. From above, the destruction was clear, with houses buried, many of them illegally built and buckling from the onslaught. What lay in its wake swept into the sea.
Well, this just shows the weakness of man against nature. While a crane and a whole team are needed to lift just one vehicle, the mudslide hurled so many of them with its force. When the torrent of debris and earth came hurtling down here, little could withstand it.
Up the hill, the desolation deepens, a whole square under mud, desperate attempts to save what they can. We found Raffaella devastated by the destruction of her shop that rents motorbikes to tourists.
My son has shut himself indoors because he doesn't want to see any of this. He feels ill because he's seeing all of our sacrifices were worthless. I hope someone will help us. I'm speechless.
With rescue teams inundated, her husband and elderly father have had to step in to help clear the mud.
I feel destroyed for my daughter, of course. We'll try and see if someone will help, because we've worked all our lives to build this, and all of a sudden it disappeared.
Supplies have been brought for dozens evacuated from their homes, put up in hotels, guests on their own island. Larissa from Ukraine has lived here for 20 years.
I came out shouting to my husband that our neighbours had lost their daughter and her baby. I was back in Ukraine during the war. Then I came here and our houses are destroyed and people are missing. How could this happen?
Then a mass to bring solace to those seeking answers in tragedy. Their minds turned to the moment the earth broke away and engulfed their lives, an island overwhelmed by itself. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Ischia.
Too many people in the UK who are facing the end of their lives are being let down by inadequate out-of-hours support. Research by the charity Marie Curie has found people with terminal illnesses and with palliative care needs having to go to emergency departments for help in the evenings, at night and at weekends. Our social affairs editor, Alison Holt, reports.
Rosie has terminal cancer and knows she's reaching the end of her life.
I know I'm going to die. I've got no fear of death. I'm more interested in the journey to death being as comfortable as possible.
But today's research shows in many areas getting palliative help when it's needed can be really difficult. So when Rosie found herself feeling weak and in pain, she was sent to the emergency department 3 times.
In A&E, I was seen by a lovely doctor, ECG done again, blood tests done again, wait for the blood tests to come back, and I was sent home with the same pain and the same weakness.
That's quite an old one, that's him and my daughter.
And when Tracy was caring for her father Michael in his last days, the only NHS number she had for end-of-life care closed at 4:30 in the afternoon. No good when they hit a crisis at 10 p.m.
I phoned an ambulance because that was the only people that I could think to call.
What would you like to have been there?
A phone number, advice. People don't just die during office hours.
Michael passed away the following day. The research for the charity Marie Curie found that in 2/3 of the UK, out-of-hours services are patchy or non-existent, and most areas don't have consistent nursing services overnight. Here at the charity's hospice in Liverpool, they're part of a scheme which coordinates end-of-life services to ensure care is there when needed.
Without that support network of healthcare professionals and even just giving that a little bit of advice or answering a concern, I think it can escalate quickly and family members get very concerned about their loved ones.
A doctor or nurse can be contacted for advice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that means fewer people end up in hospital.
The emphasis for us is that it's quality of care with the right people around them. We have managed to reduce the average number of unplanned admissions in the last 3 months of life by around 44%. So that's a huge number of people who are not attending hospital.
The scheme covers Rosie's area, and once in touch, she quickly got better pain relief and respite care.
I know I can call them any time, day or night if I need them. And based on the outcome from the first time I called them, I've got confidence that they will be able to help me.
The government says it supports high-quality end-of-life care and that the NHS is providing more funding for such services. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Now, one of the global effects of the war in Ukraine has been wheat becoming more scarce and more expensive in many countries because of the disruption to grain from Ukraine. But there's also a need for new varieties of wheat, better able to cope with disease and climate change. Might old varieties be a good place to start? Our science editor, Rebecca Morel, explains.
Wheat, and Britain the most momentous harvest of all time.
It's a crop we've long relied on.
Wheat being harvested in 1946.
Their enemies are wind and rain.
It was the start of a farming revolution, growing only a few varieties chosen to produce as much grain as possible.
Every ear counts.
It's led to a lack of diversity. And today's wheat is coming under intense pressure from climate change and disease. But these old files at the Natural History Museum could contain a solution. There are 12,000 specimens of wheat and its relatives stored here, and they date back to the 1700s and come from every continent apart from Antarctica. And the hope is that looking back into the past can help us to produce the crops of the future.
This specimen, which was collected on Captain Cook's first voyage to Australia.
Oh wow, you can see the dates, can't you?
Yeah.
Every wheat specimen is painstakingly examined and photographed, and 1,500 of them will have their genomes sequenced.
Because the collection spans also across time, across 300 years, we have specimens that are from before the introduction of various agricultural techniques, so they can tell us something about how wheat was growing wild or before things like artificial fertilisers.
The project will take months to complete.
So here we are.
At the John Innes Centre in Norwich, they're also shining a light on the past.
I wanted to show you these old herbarium sheets.
Their samples go back 100 years, and they're looking to crossbreed these older plants with today's varieties.
And what we want to do is look for new and useful genetic variation, so disease resistance, stress resistance, increased yield.
They've already started some field trials. It's essential to find solutions. Climate change and the extreme weather it brings is reducing the amount we can grow globally. And pests and diseases are a big problem too. 1/5 of the projected yield is lost to them each year.
There's a very important disease of wheat, which is a global problem called yellow rust. And that has been increasingly difficult to control and defend wheat against. Within this collection of old wheat, there are new resistances to that disease which stand up against this disease, and they're being deployed by breeders right now to defend this really important threat to wheat production.
The wheat we grow is going to have to change. Looking back into our past and rediscovering lost varieties could be the best way to move forward. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
In the last hour, Matt Hancock has finished in third place on the ITV reality series I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The former Health Secretary's decision to join the show was controversial and resulted in him being suspended from the Conservative Party. In the last couple of minutes, footballer Jill Scott has just won. She was still up against Hollyoaks star Owen Warner in the last two, but this was tonight's final and Jill Scott has won it. Now to today at the World Cup, Nestor McGregor in Doha can take us through all the action. Hello, Nestor.
Hello. Well, listen, Germany versus Spain is a fixture worthy of being a World Cup final. But a few minutes ago, they played out a very, very tense Group E clash here at the Al Bayt Stadium. If Germany had lost, their World Cup would have been all but over. Two proud footballing nations with very different starts in Qatar. Spain plenty to sing and dance about after a 7-0 win, while the German fans had every reason to be nervous. Lose again tonight and Germany, for the second World Cup running, would be out at the group stage. Unthinkable. The Spaniards immediately showed their intent though. A spectacular shot, a spectacular save.
Just gets that right hand across.
Antonio Rudiger's primary job is hit straight offside. A stalemate at half-time, but 8 turn to freshen up their attack. Germany pushed for a winner, but
the result is fair against a very tough Spanish side. Now it's all about the last game of the group stage.
Elsewhere in Group E, Japan suffered a shock defeat to Costa Rica, and also Belgium suffered a surprise loss as well, as Ben Croucher reports.
Every 4 years, the World Cup unites fans the world over, a celebration of the best teams, the best players, a chance to be heard. Conventional or unintentional, Morocco were out to catch Belgium unawares. Kevin De Bruyne says Belgium's got no chance of winning the World Cup as they're too old. A 22-year-old Moroccan made his point very clear.
Bouclal makes it 2.
So, can you hear Morocco now? Time. Wholly entertaining going forward, just wholly in defence. Canada's Qatar quest was curtailed in the group phase, but we may not have heard the last of Croatia. Sometimes you don't have to shout the loudest, just hit the right note. This was Costa Rica's only shot on target against Japan.
Oh, it's in!
Joy unconfined. For most, anyway. Ben Croucher, BBC News.
Ben Croucher reporting, and some more news from Doha because England have been training ahead of their final group match against Wales. And afterwards, Marcus Rashford gave an update on how the team was feeling.
So, you know, we obviously, we're not happy with the way that we performed in the last game. We know that we can do better, but at the same time, we're in a strong position in the group. You know, it's not often that teams win all 3 games in group games, so you know, if we manage to beat Wales, which we'll be looking to do, then it can be considered as a good start.
Remember, Wales need to beat England to stand any chance of making the knockout stages. And their midfielder Joe Allen was asked, is it an impossible task?
Not impossible, no. It's a tough task. It's always uncomfortable when it's obviously not in your hands and you're relying on certain things to unfold. But whilst there's still a chance, it's really simple for us. We're fully motivated and fully incentivised to throw absolutely everything into getting a win.
That's it from Doha for today, but tomorrow plenty more football with Brazil and Portugal in action. Back to you.
Nesta, thank you very much. Well, here it's time for us to take a look at the weather. Darren Betts here in the studio. Hello, Darren.
Hello there, Michelle. November has been very mild. It's also been very wet. But as we head into December, the weather pattern is going to be changing over the week ahead. It's going to be turning drier. It's also going to be turning colder, and there may well be some mist and fog around over the next couple of days. We'll see some of that developing tonight. The story of the day, though, has been these bands of cloud bringing showers into western areas. The shield of cloud across England has brought more rain into Sussex. That rain in southeastern areas is moving away. We'll keep some showers, though, spilling into some western parts of the UK, but towards the east, skies will be clearer, winds will be light. There'll be some mist and fog forming, particularly across the northeast of England. And it will be a bit colder actually tonight. Temperatures could slip away to around 3 or 4 degrees. That mist and fog that does form will slowly lift during the morning. We'll see the showers in Scotland and Northern Ireland fading away. Plenty of sunshine here, but the showers will feed in over the Irish Sea into West Wales, South West England, 1 or 2 developing in the Midlands and other parts of southern England. But large parts of the UK in the afternoon will be dry with some sunshine. The winds are going to be light, but it will be a little bit cooler than today, but still making double figures, which is still on the mild side for the moment. However, by Tuesday morning, with clearer skies, there's the risk of some frost, especially in Scotland. But given all this moisture after all this rain, we're more likely to have some mist and fog forming more widely overnight and into Tuesday, particularly in the Midlands, and that could linger through much of the day. Elsewhere, the mist and fog tending to lift, some sunshine coming through. The winds, again, very light, could make 9 degrees actually in Belfast, but where that fog lingers, it will be a few degrees colder than that. And all this mild Atlantic air that we've had throughout the month, not really making it to the UK. We've got this big blocking area of high pressure in Scandinavia. That keeps us in colder air with an easterly wind by the end of the week. Michelle.
Darren, thank you very much. That's it from me for tonight. The news continues here on BBC One, though, with our colleagues across the nations and regions and the news where you are. Good night.